Alright, here we go. I'm going to try to record 3 podcasts here today, potentially, but let's do things one at a time. So the first bit of material that I want to go through is just a set of passages from Game of Thrones Book 4, Feast for Crows, where George R. R. Martin's writing a Jaime chapter. Jaime is essentially approaching River Run, which is under siege. Brynden Tully is in charge of the castle, and essentially the Freys, who are the Lannisters' foolish allies, the Red Wedding having already occurred, they're besieging the castle and threatening to hang Edmure Tully, who has already impregnated his Frey wife, and so there's all sorts of considerations at play. And Jaime in particular, he is on a mission from King's Landing to essentially return, I guess, the Stark girl's home, or to help out Brienne with her thing, but specifically in this case, he's besieging River Run at Cersei's sort of, at her command. She sent him out of the city after she tried to make him hand, yada yada yada. We've gone over the fact that Cersei, not exactly in her right mind. And then you have Jaime, which is obviously, Jaime is Cersei's twin. They're very similar characters. They're obvious mirrors of each other, even if I've heard they're not identical siblings, but something his aunt says seems to be to the contrary. But that notwithstanding, you've got these two twins who, they're in different positions because of their their genders place them in different roles. So Cersei is queen in King's Landing, arguably making scores of unwise decisions, kind of one after the other, in not the most controlled of manners, and obviously not thinking things through, and the consequences of some of her decisions are going to be on display here in this conversation. But yeah, just wanted to go through this chapter a little bit. Not the whole thing, but I think there's a lot of good material in this Jaime chapter from Feast. So let's see where I should start here. Yeah, I guess I'll just start here. So I think this is Aunt Genna, Lady Genna, who is Genna Lannister, who's married to some sort of Frey, who essentially comes into the tent, and he's trying to press his claims as he's been made Lord of Riverrun, although under the new arrangements, the Lord Paramount is still Peter Baelish as the Lord of the Trident, from being the Lord of Harrenhal. So that dude doesn't even understand how to play sort of the Game of Thrones correctly. But Genna Lannister is a different breed, and her son is Cleos Frey, who's this guy who accompanies Jaime and Brienne on their way back to King's Landing. And he passes away. Well, I don't want to say passes away. He dies. He's killed on the way back to King's Landing. I believe something happens in a battle, and he gets drugged by his horse because his ankle's caught in the saddle, and he's dragged along the ground for a while and bounces basically to death. But Jaime sort of thinks about the fact that he's basically a feast for crows, was at the time when he died, etc. So there's no way even that Genna Lannister's request for her son's bones to lie in the Hall of Heroes, or whatever it is she says, Jaime thinks to himself, like, yeah, well, if I go out after the war and I find them, then yeah, maybe I'll be able to inter those bones there. But it's slightly presumptuous on her part, but no one would blame her for trying to press the claim of her child. So Genna says, why does a man with one pot of gold need another? Men are greedy. Tywin should have granted Riverrun to Kevin, Derry to M. I would have told him so if he had troubled to ask me, but when did your father ever consult with anybody but Kevin? She sighed deeply. I do not blame Kevin for wanting the safer seat for his own boy. Mind you, I know him too well. What Kevin wants and what Lancel wants appear to be two different things. Jaime told her of Lancel's decision to renounce wife and lands and lordship to fight for the holy faith. If you still want Derry, write to Cersei and make your case. Lady Genna waved her cup in dismissal. No, that horse has left the yard. M has it in his pointed head that he will rule the Riverlands. And Lancel, I suppose we should have seen this coming from afar. Life protecting the High Septon is not so different from a life protecting the king after all. Kevin will be wroth, I fear, as wroth as Tywin was when you got it in your head to take the White. At least Kevin still has Martin for an heir. He can marry him to Gatehouse Amy in Lancel's place. 7, save us all, his aunt gave a sigh. And speaking of the 7, why would Cersei permit the Faith to arm them again? Jaime shrugged. I'm certain she had reasons. Reasons? Lady Genna made a rude noise. They had best be good reasons. Sword and stars troubled even the Targaryens. The Conqueror himself tread carefully with the Faith so they would not oppose him. And when Aegon died, and the lords rose up against his sons, both orders were in the thick of that rebellion. The more pious lords supported them, and many of the small folk. King Maegor finally had to put a bounty on them. He paid a dragon for the head of any unrepentant warrior's son, and a silver stag for the scalp of a poor fellow, if I recall my history. Thousands were slain, but nigh as many still roamed the realm, defiant, till the Iron Throne slew Maegor, and King Jaehaerys agreed to pardon all those who would set aside their swords. I'd forgotten most of that, Jaime confessed. You and your sister both. She took another swallow of her wine. Is it true that Tywin was smiling on his beer? So, a little pause there, because just read for almost a chapter, but you see Lady Genna's got a very good sense of sort of the Game of Thrones sort of style of thinking, where she's essentially trying to optimize the positioning of herself and of her family members within the scope of things as they are, being the person she is in the situation that she's in, essentially being married to a Frey she didn't want to be married to, and she'll say later Tywin was the only one strong enough to speak against the match and all these different things, but you know, Jaime basically tells her that she can argue about, you know, having one of her children, I think, grant one lordship to her child or whatever, but she waves her cup to dismiss Jaime as if it's like, you know, Jaime, I don't care that much about that. But Lady Genna, she's obviously a little bit different because I think she's characteristic of a kind of rational character within this sort of Game of Thrones universe, where she has sort of a relatively correct and sharp understanding of herself, her position in the world, as far as understanding that even though she's a Frey, she's you know, she's a Lannister, as far as the more important part of the prestige of her family makeup, and therefore, you know, she somewhat arrogantly expects her son to Cleos Frey to be treated like a Lannister would be, but she thinks that because she is a Lannister herself, and therefore she she participates in that sort of legacy, and she's very much invested, as I think a lot of the kind of the lesser Lannisters, they're invested in House Lannister, as far as they probably want either to see House Lannister do well, or at least for House Lannister to be able to confer benefits upon, lesser outshoots of House Lannister, other such things. They want the Westerlands to be one of the premier areas, one of the premier kingdoms within the Seven Kingdoms, etc. And so Lady Genna is like, she understands basically in this scene there's no real need to rock the boat too much. I can basically just bitch about this problem to my nephew, knowing, he's not going to take this to the queen. I can just kind of complain about it freely. And then it's interesting, though, that she compares Lancel to Jaime, and but even more interesting, she talks about Kevin will be wroth, as wroth as Tywin was when you got it in your head to take the white. So that can be interpreted as like a slightly deliberate misunderstanding of the history, where clearly, Aerys was the king. He decided to put Jaime on the King's Guard, but why exactly did he do that? I haven't even necessarily gotten deep enough into the books to say I have a full enough understanding of that. I guess that's part of a much broader thing of the whole Tourney of Harrenhal sort of storylines that are allegedly going to be written about one day. But I think Lady Genna here, in her sharp way, is sort of pointing to the fact that that Jaime may have had a hand in being appointed to the King's Guard. And I think I've heard this in some of the narrations from the show actors, that essentially the appointment was supposedly arranged in some way by Cersei in order to reunite Cersei and Jaime in King's Landing, and then Cersei ends up getting sent back to the Casterly Rock while Jaime takes her place in the court, etc. So it doesn't go quite the way they wanted if they conspired in that way, but I'm still trying to get to that point of having the further understanding, and people like Lady Genna are starting to maybe poke certain holes in the story as far as just pointing out certain similarities and pointing out certain dissimilarities. At least Kevin still has Martin for an heir, whereas Tyrion, she's pointing out, clearly not a suitable heir for Tywin, even though she will say Tyrion is the true son of Tywin in the fullest sense. But then, so she goes through these things, and then she's just kind of honestly rolling through these issues, and then gets a little pause, sighs, and then says, seven save us all, and then it's like, oh yeah, religion. Why would Cersei permit the faith to arm again? And then Jaime sort of characteristically, he shrugs. I'm certain she had reasons, like, this dude does not often seemingly question the orders that come his way. I guess especially if they come from somebody like Cersei, but, arguably the only sort of orders that he doesn't follow for the most part are when Aerys ordered him to bring him Tywin's head. It's kind of the only order he didn't follow, and that sort of kingslayed his reputation. But then Genna just basically points out, like, these religious folks were a problem for the Targaryens, and they had dragons, and so even Jaehaerys the Conciliator had to pardon a lot of people, and Jaime forgets this history, but Genna is one of these people who doesn't, and so she's sort of pointing this out. It's like, hey, not to like raise alarm bells with the wrong people, but this was not smart to have rearmed the faith, whether it was in return for them forgiving a debt. That's clearly you indebting yourself in a different manner, one that's arguably going to put Cersei in danger, at least in the capital, cause problems for them, like further decentralize the power of the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms to really be able to unite things. Been seeing some videos lately basically being like, oh, Robert had sort of a keen understanding of how limited his power truly was, how he couldn't really afford to leave the crown lands too long unless he was in sort of a relatively safe location, and even in his safest location he's still kind of characteristically surrounded by Lannisters and other people who he doesn't really appreciate. And so arguably there's like a losing of power among the central powers, and then if you have somebody like Dany come back with dragons, it will reset sort of the chessboard. Then to move on to the next page, one thing Genna says is she asks Jaime, is it true Tywin was smiling on his beer? Jaime, he was rotting on his beer, made his mouth twist. Was that all it was? That seemed to sadden her. Men say that Tywin never smiled, but he smiled when he wed your mother, and when Aerys made him hand, when Tarbeck Hall came crashing down on Lady Ellen, scheming bitch, Tig claimed he smiled then. And he smiled at your birth, Jaime. I saw that with mine own eyes, you and Cersei, pink and perfect, as alike as two peas in a pod. Well, except between the legs, what lungs you had. Hear us roar, Jaime grinned. Next you'll be telling me how much he liked to laugh. No, Tywin mistrusted laughter. He heard too many people laughing at your grandsire. She frowned. I promise you, this mummer's farce of a siege would not have amused him. How do you mean to end it, now that you're here? So just to pause real quick. So Jenna's kind of trying to figure out why they allowed Tywin to be depicted, smiling on his beer, and then, she's saddened by Jaime's response that he was rotting. Maybe she has some sort of understanding of the poisoning aspect of things, although I'd say doubtful of that, because that's assuming quite a bit. But then and I just want to count this up real quick, but 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're saying that Tywin smiled 4 times when he married Genna, or when he married what was Tywin's wife's name? I think her name was Genna too, so maybe they've got the same name with different letters. Weird. Yeah, this was sort of parallels they do within these families with George in this story, but obvious events where monumental moments in Tywin's life, and sort of an alleged smile that his brother Tig seems that he said he saw, whatever, and then Jenna's sort of reminiscing as well of how much Cersei and Jaime would cry and stuff, and Jaime quotes the house words, hear us roar, but then they go over the history of, Tywin, because of Tytos Lannister. Too many people laughed at Tywin's father, and so, Tywin essentially wouldn't have been amused by a siege where the Freys are making a fool of themselves by pretending that they're going to hang Edmure Tully every day. They're kind of like, make your decision. Kill him, but don't just dangle him up there every day. It's not good. And so Jaime says he means the tree with the black fish, and she tells him that won't work. I mean, to offer him good terms require trust. Frey's murdered guests beneath their roof, and you, well, I mean, no offense, my love, but you did kill a certain king you had sworn to protect. And I'll kill the blackfish if he does not yield. His tone was harsher than he intended, but he was in no mood for having Aerys Targaryen thrown in his face. How, with your tongue, her voice was scornful. I may be a old fat woman, but I do not have cheese between my ears, Jaime. Neither does the blackfish. Empty threats won't daunt him. What would you counsel? Gave a ponderous shrug. M wants Edmure's head off. For once he might be right. Sir Ryman has made us a laughing stock with that gibbet of his. Need to show Sir Brendan that your threats have teeth. Killing Edmure might harden Sir Brendan's resolve. Resolve is one thing Brendan Blackfish never lacked for. Hoster Tully could have told you that. Lady Genna finished her wine. Well, I'd never presumed to tell you how to fight a war. I know my place, unlike your sister. Is it true that Cersei burned the Red Keep? Only the Tower of the Hand. Zon rolled her eyes. She would have done better to leave the tower and burn her hand. Harris Swift, if ever a man deserved his arms, it's Sir Harris. And Giles Rosby, 7 save us, I thought he died years ago. Merryweather, father used to call his grandsire the Chuckler, I'll have you know. Tywin claimed the only thing Merryweather was good for was chuckling at the king's witticisms. His lordship chuckled himself right into exile, as I recall. Cersei has put some bastard on the council too, and a kettle in the king's guard. She has the Faith arming and the Profosi calling in loans all over Westeros, none of which would be happening if she had the simple sense to make your uncle the king's hand. So, this is again more evidence in favor of the idea that Cersei is, she's mad because go through all these things that she's done. She put these people on the council. She burned the Tower of the Hand. She put a bastard on the council, a kettle in the King's Guard, has the Faith arming. She's got the Iron Bank and Braavosi all over Westeros, and she didn't appoint the right person to be Hand of the King. So she's not doing the right thing in general. But then Jaime sort of tries to make an excuse for it. He says Sir Kevin refused the office. So he said he did not say why. There was much he did not say, would not say. Lady Genna made a face. Kevin always did what was asked of him. It is not like him to turn away from any duty. Something is awry here. I can smell it. Let me restate that, because I should repeat that and get it word for word correct. So he said he did not say why. There was much he did not say, would not say. Lady Genna made a face. Kevin always did what was asked of him. It is not like him to turn away from any duty. Something is awry here. I can smell it. So she's literally saying something's fishy here, and fundamentally what's fishy is that Jaime has been having carnal relations with his sister for years and years. They pushed Bran out a window and yada yada yada. And so, this is sort of characteristic, but Genna is sort of hinting, I know what Kevin knows, which is that, you guys have all these bastards, etc. And that she fundamentally understands that that's why Kevin has, refused the duty that he would never have turned away from. Something is awry here. He said he was tired. He knows, Cersei had said, as they stood above their father's corpse, he knows about us. Tired, her aunt pursed her lips, so she knows, but I suppose he has a right to be. It's been hard for Kevin living all his life in Tywin's shadow. It's hard for all my brothers. Shadow Tywin cast was long and black. Each of them had to struggle to find a little son. Tyget tried to be his own man, but he could never match her father, and that made him angrier as the years went by. Garyon made japes, better to mock the game than to play and lose, but Kevin saw how things stood early on, so he made himself a place by your father's side. And you, Jaime asked her, it was not a game for girls. I was my father's precious princess, and Tywin's too, until I disappointed him. My brother never learned to like the taste of disappointment. She pushed herself to her feet. I've said what I came to say. I shan't take any more of your time. Do what Tywin would have done. Did you love him? Jaime heard himself asked. His aunt looked at him strangely. I was 7 when Walder Frey persuaded my father to give my hand to his second son, not even his heir. Father was himself a third-born son, and younger children craved the approval of their elders. Frey sensed that weakness in him, and father agreed for no better reason than to please him. My betrothal was announced at a feast with half the West in attendance. Ellen Tarbeck laughed, and the Red Lion went angry from the hall. The rest sat on their tongues. Only Tywin dared speak against the match. Boy of 10, father turned white as mare's milk, and Walder Frey was quivering. She smiled. How could I not love him after that? That is not to say I approved of all he did or much enjoyed the company of the man that he became, but every little girl needs a big brother to protect her. Tywin was big even when he was little. She gave a sigh. Who will protect us now? Jaime kissed her cheek. He left a son. Aye, he did. That's what I fear the most in truth. That was a queer remark. Why should you fear, Jaime? She said, tugging on his ear. Sweetling, I've known you since you were a babe at Joanna's breast. You smile like Garion and bite like Tig, and there's some of Kevin in you, else you would not wear that cloak, but Tyrion is Tywin's son, not you. Said so once to your father's face, and he wouldn't speak to me for half a year. Men are such thundering great fools, even the sort who come along once in 1,000 years. So, obviously a lot of great content, and I'm going to let that largely stand as sort of evidence in favor of all the Cersei being crazy and yada yada, but also just to show what a sort of an astute player of the game Genna Lannister is, even if she's Genna Frey or whatever, but she has such a rational understanding of the events that went around her and sort of her ability to control those events. And so even though she says it was not a game for girls, she's clearly a well trained player of the game. And it's just very interesting that she talks about her own disappointment, disappointing Tywin. I'd want to read into that to see, I guess, what the what the disappointment was in particular. I wonder if she has any more scenes. And then she basically tells Jaime there's no question that you're a Lannister, and I think is a really interesting line when she says there's some of Kevin in you, else you would not wear that cloak. I've kind of heard that line before and not heard it or not understood it properly until I read through the books to realize she's talking about the Kingsguard cloak, and essentially that a Tywin wouldn't have been appointed to the Kingsguard, wouldn't have accepted an appointment to the Kingsguard, but because there's a bit of Kevin and Jaime, he had it in him to wear the cloak. But she also says that Tyrion is Tywin's son. I said so once to your father's face, wouldn't speak to more than half a year. Men are thundering fools. So a lot of great stuff right there from her, and just a really excellent chapter in general. So wanted to do a quick little bit of material on a sort of Game of Thrones related topic, because this will be the first, I guess, of 3 bits of podcast material if I can put it together. So this was Pod 15. I guess I'll make Pod 16, trying to go through a bit of Iliad 1. I talked about wanting to do a quantitative and qualitative analysis of the Iliad. I did that for Plato's Euthyphro, which I'm much more familiar with than the Iliad, but going through the Iliad, I do have good familiarity with it. So again, I'm going to be going through it and potentially doing the sort of pause analysis reading where I'm looking through the text, trying to do that quantitative, qualitative analysis of Odysseus. How many times is he mentioned? What does he say? What does he do? Etc. So, that being said, thanks, and let's get into this next one.